Hello, everyone, and hey, Amy, thanks for coming around. Um, just a little introduction about what we're doing and why this conversation is important. So, over the years, the media ecosystem has been evolving, and when we think about the media, it is always in the minds of people, especially in the global south, that it is just the act of news. And the central reason why the media exists is to help make, not just make information available, but to also get people to have access to the news that makes them to make informed decision about themselves and also to hold government to account. And this has been happening for many years. But in the past few years, there has been digital disruption. Billions of emails being sent every second. In the past, in the 1900s, for the history of communication and media, you sort of have to wait for days, for weeks, before you know what's happening in the other end of the road. But today, with digital disruption, everyone could get what's happening anywhere in the world right now. Amy has, over the years, worked at the intersection of news, technology, and innovation. And there's a global movement, that's trying to say, you know what? It's important for us to start thinking about the evolution of the media and the intersection with technology, innovation, and what it means really. So, Amy, we will get right into this conversation. Do you want to just try and just give us like a background as to where we are coming from and where we are at the moment and what CNTI, the Center for Technology, News, and Innovation, sought to achieve with the global movement?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And for letting me talk with you today. It's absolutely true that we have always seen advancements in technology affect the way we get news and information, right? Whether it was being able to have a printing press and create print newspapers, to have radio broadcasts, to be able to get news and information out to people. And in the role of journalism, it has been about how can journalists get the best version of the facts of what's happening in the events and issues of the day out to the people, using the technological means that are available to do that, and to be able to think about what are the best ways to do that and to get that information to the people who need them. As technology brings advancements and opportunities, it also naturally creates ways to use those opportunities in bad ways, in harmful ways. And so there's been this balancing act of how do we as journalists, as those seeking and have the mission of getting people the news and information that's important, how do we use technology and enable those benefits while also guarding against the harms? And part of that has to do with the public being educated and seeking the facts and the factual news. As we've moved over these last decades and we're getting to a place where technology is advancing at rapid paces, the world is getting smaller, our news and information landscape is global. So the way that people are getting news digitally, that's one of the big changes, is in terms of the possibility and the advancements. I mean, there are so many wonderful ways of innovation, whether it's about ways to produce stories, and there's so many people that are here today at this conference that are using really innovative ways to tell stories, whether it's video or pictures or words or capturing things, to be able to make the world smaller, to be able to get an understanding of what's happening way outside one's geographic bounds, to give minority voices to people. But it also has rapidly allowed for innovative ways to use those in misuses. How to, being targets of disinformation. And so the challenge we face today as a global society is how do we enable these benefits and create structures, whether they're legislative policies or others, that do that enable the benefits and guard against the harms in a way that does not end up putting at risk the value of an independent news media and people's access to fact-based news. That's the genesis of CNTI, which is really, as I was looking at things over the last few years while I was still at Pew Research Center, leading that area of research, was that in many cases we were not only not making progress, but we were going backwards when it comes to safeguarding an independent press and open access to news. That press freedoms are getting put at risk and cut down all over the world and in many democracies. So we needed to, thinking about innovation, and this was mentioned yesterday in the panel on the reduction of maternal and neonatal deaths, is that innovation is often a mindset. So how do we think about approaching these challenges differently in a way that can bring together, can use research first and foremost to have evidence-based discussions, so grounded in research. I'm a firm believer that to be able to approach problems well, we need to have data so that we understand what those problems really are and what the potential implications of actions are. And we also, second, need to bring people together across industry. Journalists need to get together with technology folks, with researchers, with policy folks, to think about the best ways to make this work. And we need to be actionable towards those solutions in a way that really safeguard an independent press as things move quickly and fast forward.
Right. Thanks very much for helping to set context, about where we're coming from, where we are, and what CNTI helps to do. But let's talk about social media. And, I was looking at the data just like a few days ago, and I saw that TikTok, sort of have over 4 billion users globally. And that is at a scale that is unprecedented. A research also shows that, 50%, more than 50% of news consumers sort of get the news on Facebook, right? Then WhatsApp and all of those platforms, Twitter and the likes. So what that means is that the information consumers of years ago, they are now themselves becoming information creators, right? And the boundary, between journalism and social media influencing is sort of blurring. Professionals sort of know that a social media influencer is not a professional journalist, and they are not bounded by the ethics of the profession. But the people who are in need of news, they don't know which one is different from each other, right? Like someone would just say, oh no, journalists are not ethical, right? But the news you're consuming is from a blog. And a blog is not necessarily driven by the ethics and the professionalism of the profession. So it's sort of like confusing, audiences, because people spend a lot of time on social media trying to find news, what's happening in their daily lives and all of those things. So how do you think the social media age is sort of affecting, the information ecosystem? And how do you think the positives of these can be harnessed, for, news credibility and, of course, to further, advance media literacy?
Yeah, social media has had a profound impact on the way we get news, the way the public thinks about news. I'd say there were two key, really structural, fundamental changes that social media brought on. And when you think back to, I did my first social media study when Facebook was really just becoming, kind of to the fore in the US in the early 2000s. And two of the things that became evident very quickly in the way social media was changing the news landscape and people's concept of news was that they, on number one, it took away the structural distinctions of news. So if you think about, the packaged newspaper or the news program on television or a magazine, you look at that and you can see the brand. It looks different than other types of content. In a social media feed, the news, if a news outlet is there, it doesn't look any different in that post than other content. And so the ability to sort of naturally create a distinction there is much harder because it's not there. And the second thing that we saw very early on as this was taking place is a shift in whether people say they mostly seek news out. So they're a news follower, they get news. Do I seek it out or do I wait for news to find me? And a big shift in our global society today is that more and more people are waiting for news to come to them because they know it will. And that's where that element of just capturing whatever's coming at you quickly and saying, oh yeah, I heard about that, I got it, I saw this line, comes into play. But the positive is that news has found its way into all the social media spaces. News was not initially a reason or the fundamental reason that most social media sites were created. And news found their way there. And we even see what Facebook with Threads was trying to say, well, we purposely don't want news in there. Well, too bad, people are putting news in there anyway. It becomes a gaming thing. There are ways for people to misuse it and put in disinformation. But the reason news has gotten in these spaces is because it's something people care about over the course of the day. They want to find out what's happening. And so the question then for journalists and the news industry is how do we start to think about news in a way that in some cases meets people where they are, right, and is able to create these structures so that people can identify news. And that comes to, I think, another thing we were going to touch on, which is the question of relevance. The public and citizens have to understand and value journalism as different, which is what you were talking about. If they say, well, I got this, and don't actually understand the distinction. We talk about news literacy a lot, and I would often want to use the term news relevance. We have to figure out how do we ensure that the public is seeking and cares about getting the best version of the truth, the best version of the facts that they can. And then the understanding that in most cases you're going to be looking for a journalistic endeavor to be able to provide that to you.
Right, thanks very much. And I sort of think that it makes sense to think about latching on the platform to reach more audience, right? And also to ensure that the audience that get the news, they're able to know what's relevant to them and what's news to them. And now let's dive a little bit into artificial intelligence, right? Pretty much ChatGPT of every other thing that comes with it. There are concerns and apprehensions everywhere. In the US, the Writers Association just recently sort of had a strike, and he said, those people who write and get paid per hour, right? They are saying the work they could do for 25 hours, get paid for it. AI could do it in less than 5 to 10 minutes. And that means they're going to be out of jobs. And I sort of get to know that a lot of journalists sort of have this and say, oh no, we don't want ChatGPT right now. We are not, we're not even getting enough money, from what we do currently. How do you want to displace us, right? So there's been a lot of, pretty much, apprehension, and it's different across the world. The reception and the thinking about it in the US is separate. The thinking about it in Europe is not the same. In China, it's separate, but in African countries, it's a different ballgame, right? And when we think about it, how do you think the opportunities where AI could help generate news, but there are some humanistic components, there are some ethical components, there are some professionalism that still needs, the touch of humans. So how do you think this, this cluster of concerns around artificial intelligence and the intersection, within news and, credibility. How do you think that sort of operate, from your standpoint? And how do you think, where do you think there are opportunities for African newsrooms?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see the conversations and the degree to which it's become a real focal point around the world. I think one of the things we need to remember is that it is a tool, like most technology, right? And how can journalists use AI as a tool to fulfill the mission even better? So if the mission is to get the best version of the truth, of the facts, of the days and the events to the public, how can AI help enable that? And there's a lot of focus on tools inside the newsroom, specifically around sort of, things that I'm currently doing as a journalist that maybe my organization would have AI to do. But I think there are also a lot of other kinds of tools, whether it's image capturing in places where journalists can't get, whether it's helping to detect disinformation. Are there ways to advance the core structure in a ways that's different? The way CNTI is approaching this question is around how do we enable the benefits and manage the harms, and to think about it holistically. We held our first issue convening. So we have an issue primer that really lays out, if we're thinking about structures and regulations and policies, to be sure that we do the best with AI that we can in terms of informing the public and safeguarding quality news, is to have definitional considerations be at the core of any policy. So we held our first issue convening. We're able to bring together folks in the room from 3 major technology companies, from many journalists. Apo Iloyoramo was there with us. And we talked about sort of what isn't necessarily the most exciting conversation to have, but it was around the definitions. What goes in an AI bucket? There's a lot more than ChatGPT or generative AI that's AI when you think about the ways that it's being used and has been used for years in journalism. And if you're going to create policies, one has to know what goes in that bucket and what doesn't. And as we came out, there were 4 sort of principles that this group agreed on. And one was that we as a society need to have better articulation of the definition of AI, of the categorization of the types of uses of AI, before we go into any policy. We need to, when we think about the benefits and the harms, that in many cases, it's the context of use and the degree of use that can depend on whether something ends up being a benefit or a harm. If we think about algorithmic transparency, that's one of the things this group talked about a bit. You think about algorithmic transparency when it comes in the hiring process, or transparency that, yes, we used AI to, be able to help report this story. Is there a point at which an element of transparency in the millions of tokens that go into an LLM, say, end up actually putting risk at actors with bad intentions of being able to take advantage of access to that knowledge and that transparency? So how do we think about that element of the benefit and risk in terms of the context of the use? And then that in creating these technological tools, as I mentioned yesterday, we need to be thinking about potential disparities in what's in the models. So what languages are being represented, what cultures are being represented, what are the kinds of things that we need to be sure these models are portraying accurately. And then we need to consider the inputs and the outputs throughout the course of the process.
Right, thank you very much. And I'm trying to get just wrapped, so I'll just ask 2 more questions, then we're good. But this third question, this other question will sort of bring about 2, 3 things together. So let's talk about the development of these tools. How do we get technology companies to sort of work with the news industry to develop tailor-made tools, artificial intelligence tools that sort of help, to advance innovation within the news ecosystem. Then how do we talk about the response of government, with the deployment of artificial intelligence and the conversation around algorithm governance, content moderation, and platform regulation? It's sort of, and of course, it means different things in different, markets, depending on the lens upon which you're looking at it. So how do you think, we could foster collaboration within tech companies and news industry? And how do you think that navigation can be done, effectively with working with governments to look at the side of regulation to ensure that innovation thrives, regulatory processes, thrives, and the news integrity thrives, and the citizens who get access to information get, quality content?
Yeah. I think, that's the heart of CNTI and really the mission of it, which is to think about how do we have these conversations? We, technology companies and journalism organizations and research and policy have to get in the same room and talk. Right. And we have to start those conversations with research, evidence, and some shared understanding of what the current situation is, of the importance of journalism, and the value of technology in being able to get news to people, and of research to be able to drive things forward. So it has to start by sharing, if there's not total agreement on all the parameters of an issue at hand, right? There's going to be disagreements. People have different interests or vantage points in terms of where they're coming from. But if we can at least start by saying, we all agree that journalism is important, that getting news and fact-based news to our societies is a critical element of a functioning democracy, and that technology has been a way that we get that news to people. If we can get in a room and say, we agree on that, now let's have a conversation about how we safeguard that. How do we enable that? How do we create policies that don't unintentionally, in some cases intentionally, but often unintentionally, end up giving us the opposite of what we're really looking for because we didn't fully think through that, because we didn't take the time. If journalists, media organizations, and technology and research can have these conversations before the policy gets written, it's a lot easier to then start with a policy that's better informed, that's more fully informed, and work towards that its end.
Yeah, thank you very much. And before I ask my last question, I just want to throw it out if we have questions. Okay, I'm going to take one. Okay, two. I think I'll just take two questions. So can we have you first, and you then would ask the last question. Drop.
Thank you. My name is Chukwemeka.
So can you please say it louder?
Okay.
It's louder.
My name is Chukwemeka. So please, I would like to get your thoughts on because there's increased talk in adopting or embracing AI. But lately, I'll use myself for example. I think I'm becoming over reliance on AI like ChatGPT. Like I get to sometimes I just take a stock of myself when I've not been using the ChatGPT, and now I get to. It seems as if I want to always even when my mind tells me something, what will ChatGPT say about this thing? So I get to lose confidence in my own thoughts.
All right.
So I want to know, is this just me, or is it where do we strike?
All right, thank you. We get it. That's the first question. Just going to ask. I think you're speaking in the minds of a lot of people, so that's okay. I think the second question.
Thank you very much. My name is Aminu Adamunaganye from Wiki Times. we all know that the disruption brought about by the information technology and communication technology has revolutionized the way media content is being produced and disseminated. And for that, we have seen individuals who are non-professionals, probably are not creating anything great, but because of maybe entertainment or something, are able to create and sustain attention of a lot of people. And we have seen that some people are having a lot of followers, more than the traditional media that we have. Now, in doing that, the political elite, for example, in Nigeria, are actually not happy with the way media is exposing them, especially when it comes to accountability. So they are now trying to, at a point in time, to bring about the issue of regulation. So I don't know, do you think that it's better that the media continue to regulate itself, or because of this challenge by the non-professionals, there is a need for a kind of blending between the professionals and probably the government to bring a kind of subtle, I wouldn't want to say regulation, but a kind of framework that will guide the operation. But then we have a very terrible history of, government interference in terms of media. So how can we navigate and have a very better environment?
That's all right, thank you. So is there a female that want to ask a question? Okay, go right there. Sorry, I wanted to take two, but I needed to just get, that's fine.
Good morning. My name is Ezinne Alozi from Darling FM Owerri. My question is just, is there any innovative way we as journalists need to, maybe what we need to do, one innovative way, just one, that we should do to make our job more easier?
Okay, right, thank you. So, Amy, there are three questions there. So the first one is human intelligence versus artificial intelligence. People sort of get very comfortable, using AI for everything, and they sort of think that, is it normal, or what's the best way to sort of maintain a balance? That's one. And the second question is, I think I sort of captured that when we're studying about, proliferation of content by non-professionals, but because the audience don't necessarily know the difference between a blogger, a journalist, a social media influencer. So there is that line that's blurry between journalism and credible content, and government sort of wants to, regulate, the platform. There has been a number of conversations on, in fact, at some point in Nigeria, Twitter was banned for 6 months. So there is that level of, apprehension. Should media continue to regulate itself? Should government regulate? Then is media regulation the same as digital platform regulation? How does that intersect? And the last question is, what innovative way? And I think it's pretty much more like, with all these tools that we have available, how best can journalists latch on those for efficiency?
Those are great questions. I think on the first one, on sort of the question of thinking versus reliance on a machine to do the thinking for us. I don't know that we're so close to that point in society. I know things move quickly. I do think the creative mind, people want to understand and think, and just like we have to carve out times in our day to do certain things. I carve out time to sit and read and focus and put other things away. We need to be sure that we continue to have face-to-face conversations when it becomes so easy not to. These days, we are going to have to be sure that we safeguard the use of our thinking and our creative juices to be able to drive innovation as well. It's innovation that and people's thinking that led to the creation of generative AI to begin with. So how do we ensure, and that's part of what we have to put on ourselves, right? Is being sure that we continue to pause. And that's a big part of what I think is so needed these days in many of these conversations, is to just pause for a minute and think, what's our goal? What are we seeking? What's the benefit of doing this if our ultimate goal is X? And that gets to the second question, too, which is this balance of, is there a point for regulation? What's the right way to manage this? And again, the way that CNTI approaches this is that there's likely a meld of different ways to think about enabling benefits, safeguarding an independent press, creating safety mechanisms, cybersecurity mechanisms for journalists. That's certainly something that has risen very significantly over the last few years in terms of those risks. But to go into it with full knowledge of saying, what's the end goal? What are we seeking to do here? And how do we best do that? And that requires usually using research and data and evidence and past examples, policy and other kinds of examples to say, how did this go? How do we do the steps in a way that are really thoughtful and planned out? One of the areas that we'll focus on, this is another not as exciting to sometimes articulate, but is really important, is if we are creating policies, whether they're organizational or legislative, what's that oversight structure going to be? And if we create an oversight structure, how does that play out in the long term if the people leading that oversight structure change? Whether it's a government structure or a third-party structure, how do we ensure that the language in that policy gives only whatever power and authority is needed to that oversight structure in a way that we know is going to safeguard an independent news media and the safety of journalists and access to news?
All right, thank you very much. And I think that we just close with what excites you right now about the future of news, technology, and innovation. If you can let us wrap with that thought in about a minute, then I think we're good.
Well, I think there's so much opportunity, and listening to all the work that so many of you are doing here and listening to yesterday's sessions, there's just terrific energy and innovation and ideas that are coming for how do we do this in ways that are exciting and new and different. And I do see in many cases the world, at least becoming somewhat more aware and smaller in that sense. One of the things that's been so invigorating to me as we launched CNTI, we just launched in September. I've been talking about it for a few months prior to that, is people's interest in understanding, that we really need this, desire to be a part of it across these areas of industry, whether it's technology, whether it's journalists and media organizations, research, policy folks, to say, we need to do this. We need to come together. This is important. That, to me, is where the possibility then comes from.
Right. Thank you very much. And I think that, thanks for, coming all the way from the United States, for this conversation. Say that at the Center for Journalism, Innovation, and Development, we are doing things differently. We are repositioning, the way media is being done in Africa. And I think that with CNTI, CGID is happy, to see how we can work together to run the African side of things. Because trust me, there are opportunities there, and we would get to it, distant time. Well, thank you very much, Amy, for coming around, and see you again.
I look forward to that and working together. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.